Hi everyone, I hope that you're doing well today. And what I'd like to do in this video is take some time to go over the outcomes for our second batch of assignments in EH 200. This would include step 6, 7, 8, and 9. And just as was the case with my last video, it's really important that you attend to what I say here, that you take notes over what I say, perhaps come up with a little skeleton outline in your notebook that makes distinctions between the different steps, and that you use the information in this video to refine and develop your work going forward. It's also really important to let me know if you have questions or comments about what I say, to shoot me an email or something else to get my attention, hopefully just an email, and we can work to make things make more sense to you. Okay? So let me just make a couple of quick modifications here to my screen, and then I will be able to talk with you in some detail about the outcomes for these steps. So one moment. Okay, let's talk about step 6 first, and I'm going to bring step 6 up. And the average grade for step 6 was an 87. Okay, an 87. So a solid B, which is a very normal grade. Okay, for this point in the semester in terms of averages. If you find yourself, noticeably below that average, we want to be in conversation so I can help you continue to develop. And if you're at that average and you have questions that remain unanswered by this video, I hope to address those as well. Let's talk a little bit about why we're at an 87 as a class. We're at an 87 as a class for a couple of different reasons. One of the positive things that happened since the first batch of assignments is that I saw better organized paragraphs generally with step 6. That is, when people were revising, they were moving away from just communicating in block paragraphs. They were attending to typesetting things like tabbing in the paragraphs, although that wasn't a huge grade issue necessarily for the first batch of assignments, but they were showing more an awareness and more attention to paragraph structuring. Keeping a paragraph between 6 to 8 sentences, making sure the paragraph presents and develops a single idea, making sure the paragraph presents cited references to the text. Those kinds of things were happening much more consistently with the revisions that were submitted for step 6. One of the areas where we're struggling a bit and we need to be, I think, made more aware of, again, is this idea that when you're writing in college, your writing is almost always in reference to a document, okay? Which means that when you're writing about a short story like Cathedral, you need to be actively citing the text. That is, talking about things that happen in the text, referencing the page numbers, and then explaining how those events that you're referencing are relevant to whatever point you're trying to make. Citation should happen fairly frequently. And one of the things I saw in step 6 was a lot of submissions that made very infrequent references to Cathedral, even though engaging with the text was a major part of the assignment. So how would I know that you had engaged with the text? Well, I would see multiple references to the text, and I would see you using those references to support whatever it is you were trying to say. So some of the submissions made a few references to Kelly's introduction, not much else. Some submissions made a number of reasonable references to Cathedral. Some made no references to Cathedral at the level of citation. That is, people were talking about the text, but they weren't citing it. One of the things you need to understand is that in academic writing, if you're failing to cite the document, you're essentially not saying anything about it because you're not actually referencing something specific and showing me what in the text it is you are talking about. So one of the things we want to be aware of as we develop as students and as we develop as writers is this need to continually be engaged with the document and to be talking in the context of the document. Now, that doesn't mean that every sentence needs to include a cited reference to a textbook that you're referencing or a short story or a novel or something that you're referencing. But when I look at your writing, paragraph by paragraph, I should see fairly consistent engagement with these documents. So there were a number of submissions that had very limited engagement with Cathedral at the level of cited reference, okay? And if you want if you want me to kind of raise the red flag for what that kind of writing looks like in an academic community or really in a professional community, when you're referencing a document but you're not citing anything specific in it, you're asking the reader to just take it on your word. And that's not good enough in a professional environment, and it's not good enough in an academic environment. And it looks like what you're doing is producing filler, okay? And academically, that's not a good thing to do. And professionally, it's a really bad thing to do because people won't take you seriously if your documents don't reference something specific and external to your own thinking when you're communicating professionally. So this is really a habit you want to get into just consistently as a matter of course with your writing. Your writing needs to be in reaction to something, and we react to specific phrases, specific passages, specific events, and we cite those passages and then we talk about them. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. And so we're at an 87, which is a very good average. But if we're below that average, one of the things we're probably doing is we're struggling with cited references to the story or to the text, to the introduction or to Cathedral. Okay, so that's one thing to think about in terms of step 6. Step 7 was a quiz. The average was at 98, so I don't have much to say here. There's no evidence of widespread misunderstanding in the answers. That is, there isn't one quick question that a majority of students got wrong. So I don't have much to say here besides the approach that was taken for step 7 was a pretty good approach for a number of you. It's hard to make comments based on the average length of time because someone may have taken the quiz and just left their computer on and walked away. It looked like the average length of time was quite long. It's about 11 minutes. Makes me a little concerned that people are trying to take the quiz while they read the story. I talked about that in the first video. If you need a refresher on that, I go back and rewatch that video. But it may just be the case that people were doing their best to find specific passages in the story, and if that's the case, good for you. So a 98 is a great average. So we did a really good job there. When we get to step 8, which again was another writing assignment, which is asking you to be engaged with Kelly's ideas and then also to talk about the significance of those ideas to Cathedral. One of the issues that came up here was a very similar issue that came up in step 6, which is very few references to Cathedral showed up in submissions. Now the average was a 94, which is actually really good. So maybe I should back up a little bit and say, generally we did really well with this assignment. But when we struggled, we tended to struggle because we were demonstrating very limited engagement with Cathedral. I think a number of submissions, or several submissions, only had one reference to the whole story. And again, you're reading a story that happens on multiple pages, has multiple moving parts. We're thinking about narrator and perspective and point of view and setting all these kinds of things. And to have nothing specific to address in the story, or to have very limited information to address in the story, suggests that we're not yet very comfortable with either the story or Kelly's terms. So one of the fundamental ideas in this class is that we can take these terms for literary analysis and we can use them to make sense of the stories that we read. That is, we can bring these things together. So coming out of these assignments, what I'm seeing is limited initial awareness of how we can use some of these terms to talk about these stories. But what I need to see more practically is that you are writers who, paragraph by paragraph, are aware of the importance of evidence, the importance of citing something as evidence and speaking of that evidence when you're trying to make a point or defend a point. So that's kind of the overall, those are the overall, I guess, gist for steps 6 and 8. Step 9 was a quiz over the content of Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. Good news here with just one kind of asterisk next to it. So the step 9 was, the average was at 93. Okay, which is a very good average for a quiz. It's right in that high B, low A range. It's excellent. The average time it took to take the quiz is about 10 minutes. It's a fairly long story, so that makes a certain amount of sense to me. I'm not going to give away quiz answers here, but what I did see was when trouble emerged, it emerged at the level of specific details from the stories. Okay, so being able to recognize specific details or infer specific details from the story. And so one of the things for some of you that I would recommend at this point is really just a slower reading practice. Okay, a slower, more deliberate reading practice at the level of reading and annotating. Now that's not necessarily going to get you to a place where you automatically remember specific details. But if we have a slower reading and annotation practice, and we carry that practice into our quiz taking, I think a number of you would benefit in terms of being able to find specific details in the text or infer specific details from the text. So again, a 93 is a really high average for a quiz, and we've done very well generally with quizzes so far. But if we didn't do as well as we wanted, or if there was one question that really tripped us up, I would just say slow down a little bit, and recognize you have an open book quiz in front of you, and you have the time that it will take to do this work well. Okay, so again, a 93 is a great average, and if you didn't do as well in the quiz as you wanted, there's multiple quizzes in this class, and it's very possible to bounce back from a couple of lower quiz grades. So I wouldn't get too concerned with that at this point in the course. So overall, I am seeing some growth and development from the video I produced at the end of our first week. I look forward to seeing the work that you put together this week. I'm going to upload the video guidance videos shortly to our next batch of assignments, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, have a great beginning to the new year, and I'm sure I will talk with you soon. Bye.